Welcome everybody to this evening's virtual bar with Paolo-Morley Fletcher speaking from Rome about the wisdom dialogues. And as you'll have seen from his biography, he's a strategist, executive coach, and seeker. And he's the founder of AtmanWay and the initiator behind the wisdom dialogue movement. Just to say that the wisdom dialogue, as you may have seen, is a dialogue space informed by silence and sourced out of wisdom. And I'll now hand you over to Paolo.
So I'm delighted to be here with you, David, and with all of you. So I'll just begin by saying that I believe that the art in life is about integrating opposites. And this is what we try to do at AtmanWay, where we integrate strategy, wisdom, and action to facilitate growth and change in leaders, organizations, and society at large. Strategy, wisdom, and actions are words that are big words, and where there are also multiple and extensive definitions about these major concepts. But essentially, for me, strategy, having worked in strategy for 20 years, is about simplifying complexity. It's the art of essencing and focusing on what matters the most. And wisdom is the capacity to see within, through, and beyond what is merely visible and bridge the visible with the invisible. And action, as a third component, is about the way we see it, is about embodying to manifest a new reality through incorporating, aligning, and integrating our choices and decisions into actions. So we focus a lot on wisdom. I personally feel that for me, wisdom is it's somehow underlining everything I do and I try to do as a way to illuminate and elevate wisdom in the world in these times. And wisdom is not knowledge. Knowledge, to me, speaks more about the linear accumulation of data and experiences over time. Linear and now also getting exponential with the AI, artificial intelligence. But it's somehow always sourced from the past. At best, it infers the future, but based on the past. And somehow, to me, speaks also about a linear process that it operates horizontally in the doing, whereas the vertical speaks more to the being. And wisdom as such is a nonlinear access beyond time and space to sense what's emerging, to serve what wants to emerge through us. And as such, it gives us the ability to sense in the moment and anticipate the future. Knowledge is something we own and we accumulate over time, whereas wisdom, we don't own it. At best, we access it. So we always speak about the fact that it's not my wisdom or your wisdom, we access a larger field where wisdom speaks to us. And in that sense, a sage or a wise man or a wise woman, we have several wise women here, is not someone who owns wisdom, but rather someone who accesses and embodies wisdom in the sense of being present to and with wisdom in whatever he does, lives, or she doesn't live. And the simplest and most neglected way to be and engage with wisdom is silence. In silence, we'll listen. Silence and listen in English share the same letters. So when we listen, when we are silent, we'll listen. And only when we are silent, we're able to listen to others and to life. And in silence, we enter a dialogue. a dialogue with ourselves, a dialogue with life consciousness, and we'll let it speak to us, and to us, and to it. In that exchange, wisdom unfolds. And out of that dialogue that we engage through silence, a dialogue, as you were saying, David, is informed by silence. It gets shape through silence, and it's source out of wisdom. We can then act with awareness, alignment, and focus to co-participate in the unfolding of our world reality. In the last years, we've somehow embarked on a journey in many things we do at AtmanWay that is made of three major steps: silence, dialogue, and action. And the first step about silence is something that started off at the outbreak of the war between Russia and Ukraine. And the following day, as we were reflecting on what has happened, I somehow felt the urge to do something. And I felt a strong invitation that initially felt extremely awkward and out of place, to invite the world into silence. And after days of hesitation and unease, I wrote out an article that spoke about these three major steps that over the months and years have been viewed by quite a significant number of people, and inviting in that article the world into what we call the Wisdom Meditation Marathon. That has been a 24-hour event, inviting the world to silence and silencing the guns, where every hour, across 24 hours, from 6 a.m. in the morning until 6 a.m. of the following day, we would guide a meditation to ease the entrance into silence and then stay in silence. And we were surprised by the number of people who show up, and also by the buildup of light and energy and excitement and aligned intention that emerged out of it. And in that event, I was conscious of beginning this first step of a journey from the head to the heart to the hand, from silence to dialogue and action. But to be totally honest with you, I had no clue about how dialogue would unfold, and what actually I was meaning in my article about dialogue. I had some theoretical notions about it and some inspirations, but far from being able to execute it. It landed as a geometry that you see here depicted. Of course, the initial version of this geometry was just scribbled on a piece of paper and looked very different. Not very different, but in essence was the same, but less beautiful, let's say. And so I'd like to speak a bit about this diagram as coded information, this diagram that speaks about the unfolding of the wisdom dialogue, and somehow has guided us in the subsequent steps that led us to establishing this annual Wisdom Dialogue Day event. And in this diagram, each component speaks about an element that is crucial for the Wisdom Dialogue. So the Wisdom Dialogue follows a geometry, and the first element is the central dot. The central dot representing silence as the deeper place we enter from where we can access or get in touch with the well of wisdom. And so silence is the real protagonist of the wisdom dialogue. It is very present throughout, before and after the event and each round. And as silence reverberates and amplifies and informs the space, the dialogue acts as a sort of container that allows that reverberation amplification of wisdom being spoken to each and every one. And the context of the wisdom dialogue is the Earth as our planet, and its direction to reorient humanity. As the four major cardinal points, if you wish, these smaller circles that you see surrounding the green circle representing the Earth represent many things, out of which surely the four cardinal points. So the north, south, west, and east, and also the four elements. In each dialogue, there are 12 wisdom speakers. We call them wisdom speakers, that represent the entire humanity. The idea is that those 12 people joining somehow represent all walks of life, sectors, disciplines, and particularly they're here to represent the areas of the world less heard, less represented, less voiced out. So we have typically a good mix of indigenous elders and wisdom keepers from several sectors, from having political leaders, business leaders, entrepreneurs, physicists, artists, activists, and you name it. The broader the group in terms of provenance, the merrier and the richer dialogue, as representing the at widest our humanity. And as we sit together, a compass is somehow becoming visible here, represented by this cross. And that this cross represents also the vertical alignment with the horizontal alignment, activated by the central point through silence, wisdom in our hearts. And you somehow also see there's a little bit of a dial, a kind of a meridian that appears here, that speaks about the many hours we are in the wisdom dialogue, 24 hours where we somehow follow the light as it emerges with the sun and completes a full round across the planet. We have 4 rounds of dialogue, 1 for each part of the day, in the morning, the afternoon, evening, and night. Every 6-hour round follows a similar rhythm, where the first wedge you see here represents the initial hour, where we set the context, we set the dialogue field, and we enter into a silence practice as a way to activate the space informed by silence and enter wisdom. And then the second and third hour is the first part of the dialogue round itself, where we have 12 wisdom speakers being in a dialogue, where each and every speaker speaks when he or she feels called to, only for 3-5 minutes each time. They have several opportunities to speak, but each time they speak 3-5 minutes. Then we pause for 1 minute in silence to let silence help digest, process, and amplify whatever has been spoken or not spoken, but present in the space. And then another wisdom speaker will continue building on whatever is emerging. And we typically unravel a topic. And so in this first part, we somehow complete a first portion of a dialogue. In the 4th hour, we intentionally open the wisdom dialogue field to the larger audience of observers to engage in an exchange, and also to make sure that those outside observing also contribute in the dialogue field, knowing that the observers have a role as these wisdom speakers in the wisdom dialogue. And then we resume in the 5th and 6th hour dialogue with a second part of a dialogue. Sometimes speakers remain the same, sometimes speakers kind of morph into other ones joining, but always 12 speakers in each round. And each listening sensing circle, which are these satellites that you see at the corners of the wisdom dialogue, 1 for each round, are the opening to this larger audience to capture any reflections, any thoughts, feelings, and emotions that might emerge during dialogue and then can feed into the dialogue itself. Throughout the wisdom dialogue, what we noticed is that there's a coherence that starts to develop, first individually at the individual level, but then collectively within the inner circle, and then also including the larger circle, leading to collective heart coherence, alignment of our head, hearts, and hands, and integration as a way to move in an integrated way, a united way, after wisdom dialogue in bringing awareness and unity in our actions. And lastly, there are two letters that also are included here in the diagram, the W and the E, that speaks about building this we space, or moving from an ego space to a we space, but also about the ability to integrate the West and the East, the left and right hemisphere, together in harmony as a way, again, to integrate rather than separate, to move beyond duality. And also at the same time to follow these two major cardinal points that were the major cardinal points for in ancient times, where the sun would rise and where the sun would set. And I think I'll pause here and be open to whatever wants to unfold.
Wonderful, Paolo. And I never realized that silent and listen actually have the same letters. I think that's brilliant. And obviously silence doesn't, but silent does. So that really tells you something very, very interesting.